Episode 132, How to Kill God the Easy Way. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I chat with Alan Bondar about his provocatively titled book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. I enjoyed this book. It says a lot of things that I too would say. I recommend it to anyone who is seeking to engage with a critical review of Christian apologetics. If you have any sympathies for Christianity and its proponents, then this book will challenge those thoughts. If you have doubts about Christianity, then this book will help you focus your thoughts and put words to those doubts. Alan and I have great fun in this discussion. We clearly think in similar ways, and that comes across. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we did recording it. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable and another interview. And another book to discuss. Now, this time it isn't the book that I've been plugging, Apostate, Stories of Deconversion, the book that I contributed to chapter 2, the book that I am going to continue plugging as much as I can get away with this year, although there are some more author interviews related to that book coming up in the coming months. So please stay tuned to Still Unbelievable. I will plug that book at every single opportunity. That is a guarantee. If you haven't bought it, please go and find the episode where I plug the book and buy the book. But this book, I've got a guest here, Alan Bondar. Alan has written a very testily titled book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. I will be honest, I took an intake of breath when I saw the title of that book. I have read the book. I am very glad to have Alan on here. I am very glad I read the book. I have lots of comments or questions rather for Alan about the book. So, Alan, thank you for coming on Still Unbelievable. And before we get going, why would you even want to kill God?
Well, because God is an idea that is put into people's minds. And when you believe something that doesn't actually exist, thinking that it exists at a level where you're beyond the imagination of a child, but living your life as though this being is real and basing your entire life upon a book that you believe he wrote, which he didn't, but is an ancient book of rules that have no bearing on our lives whatsoever. It's a very dangerous way to live, and it robs you of a full life. And so what I wanted to do was help people to escape that mind virus that keeps them trapped living by an ancient book so that they can be free and live the life that in a lot of ways, I believe most Christians wish they could live, but they feel trapped and think they can't. I, being a former Christian, can actually testify to that. You live in bondage in a lot of ways. You don't think you do, because as a Christian, you continue to make excuses. Oh, this is the best way to live. This is God's way. And you just continue to suppress all of these desires that you actually have, and you call them sin. If it's not sin, if it's just a choice and you get to live it and you get to experience life and there's no consequences for it, then why are we doing that, right? So I wanted to help free people from that brainwashing, that mind virus that keeps them trapped and thinking that they're in some sort of a sin bondage that some God's going to judge them for. It's all in the minds. And if you can get rid of that, then you can live free. And that's the reason I wrote it.
Thank you, Alan. I like that answer, and that I engaged with that answer because from my own personal experience, it was something that genuinely took me by surprise. I remember, because the process of deconversion for me, and you'll probably echo this, and I know loads of people echo this, wasn't a moment of rejection. It was many years leading up to many years of questioning and many years often of pain and tears leading up to a moment of realization. And it's that moment of realization was quite revolutionary for me because I had an experience that I never predicted and never expected. I was walking down the street, I'd been shopping in town, and I'd been going through all these things in my mind. And I'd realized by then that atheism was most likely my end destination. And I was walking home and I just said to myself, Matthew, just admit it. You're atheist. And it was the first time I'd used that word positively to describe myself. And it literally was that feeling of a weight lifting off my shoulders and feeling that you're walking 2 inches taller. And it was really, really weird. I really didn't expect it. And that sense of relief brought with it a happiness and a lightheadedness that, like I said, 15 years later, I still remember that moment because it was quite something. And I remember it so more clearly than I ever remembered my original conversion experience. And I remember somebody asking me about that moment when I was telling him he was a Christian, a pastor at the time, actually, still is a pastor. And we were talking about that, and I talked about that moment that I realized I could call myself atheist and not fear it. And he said, well, how did that feel for you? And I said, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. And there was this kind of look on his face that was horror-struck surprise. Like he genuinely didn't expect me to give that answer, because that is an answer that Christians often use about their original conversion.
Yes, it is. You're right. And it is quite fascinating. I would agree. Although for me, I was raised into it from birth, so I can't speak too much about this weight being lifted. Although I can say that when I was finally, in my book, I discuss my trifecta conversion, if you will, where it started out once when I was real young with my sister teaching me the gospel, and then being at a service where I went forward and accepted Christ again, but my understanding of the gospel was insufficient at that church because my uncle pastor didn't think that my explanation of the gospel was correct. And then finally the Steve Green concert, where I finally gave my life to the Lord again, whatever. But anyway, supposedly that time took. So in a sense, I remember that portion where it was like, finally, I can get baptized and go to heaven, right? And that was such a relief for me, because when you're raised, at least the way I was raised, in the belief system of a rapture, where at any moment Christ is going to come back and the church is going to disappear, and if you're left behind, then that's the worst thing ever, right? And so I remember having episodes in my life where I would be in great fear because I thought I was left behind. And I discussed some of those episodes in my book, at least one in particular, that was pretty traumatic for me. So that was a big deal. So I do remember at least that sense of relief. Oh my goodness, finally I'm in, and I won't be left behind if this happens. Yeah. That was a very traumatic moment for me, a very important moment for me. So I know what you're talking about in that regard. I'm sure there's others as they get older and they come to the conversion, it becomes even more so because they have this idea that, oh my goodness, what if I'd have died, 16 years earlier? What would I have done? Oh my goodness, right? So it becomes this relief, but yeah, and it's strange because it is a mind virus that makes you think you need that when you don't, and then when you finally escape and you're like, what was I doing with all this time? That the freedom of release is a little different than the freedom of relief from fear. They're slightly different. The feeling you get when you're a Christian, when you convert to Christianity, is finally this thing I've been afraid of. I'm good now. I'm going to go to heaven, right? You get this kind of relief. Whereas when you get to atheism and you finally escape that brainwashing that makes you think you need all of this Jesus stuff to get to heaven, to escape the penalty of your sins and whatever that may be in your particular theology, whether it's hell or just separation from God of some sort. Coming into atheism, it's more of a relief of freedom. It's like, oh, I don't have to live like that anymore. I don't have to live. And the irony is, when you become a Christian, you think you're escaping the fear you had, that you now are saved from it, when in fact you actually continue to live in that fear your entire life, that if you ever get out, if you ever leave Jesus, you're going to die forever. And so that fear keeps you there. It keeps you there. It keeps you there. It keeps you there. And you can never get out. And when you find a way to just turn that off, which is almost impossible. It's mind blowing that I got out. It's mind blowing that you got out. It is crazy, and that's why I wrote the book, to help people find the journey that we did. But when you get out, it's a release of that fear. It's like, holy smokes, I'm free. I'm not afraid anymore of this God, this punishment, this eternal death. I can just live my life, and that's it. And it's just wonderful. And I apologize for keep talking, but that resonated with me, what you said, for sure.
Yes, and thank you for that. So let's learn a little bit more about you before we get into some of the detail of the book. So you were brought up in a Christian home, and I was brought up in a missionary environment, and it seems like you had a a very fundamentalist style upbringing, because you talked about the rapture. Presumably that meant you were exposed to the film Like a Thief in the Night, I believe it's called.
Sir, very much so.
Yeah, I think if I ever saw that film, I have no memory of it, but I hear a lot about it from people of the similar age to me, and none of it good. I'm assuming then that there must have been some kind of young earth creationism or that kind of fundamentalist, the Bible is all true and literally true kind of vibe going on, because that seems to be a very common theme that I find that it's the more oppressive the Christianity of our youth, the more enthusiastic the leaver as an adult. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that's a very good observation, Matthew. And almost another way of saying that is the more fear instilled in you as a youth, the more passionate you are to avoid that fear.
Yeah.
So you pour more into your
and to point it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, point it out when you get to our age. Yes.
Yeah.
I've talked to people who, even at a young age, they report finding the whole hell thing really problematic. And in a recent conversation with somebody where we talked about that, he said even before he was a teenager, he was finding hell problematic. And I have no memory of that. I always remember accepting hell as the thing that God did because he was holy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I would say that as my theology developed, I came to a grasp similar to that hell is necessary because God's holy, right? So he must judge anything that is unholy, right? And so and Christ, because then Christ makes us holy, and God doesn't have to judge those who are in Christ, but the rest must be judged, and that holiness demands that. Like that, sure. That was a much later development in my theology. Although I will say that even in later years in Christianity, I abandoned the concept of hell altogether. That was way before I even escaped Christianity. Before I was an atheist, I had already abandoned hell, because that I discovered that wasn't even taught in the Bible. Like the translation, terrible translation. So somehow, somewhere, that became a mainstream view of Christianity, and everybody just kind of bought into it. But it's nowhere taught in the Bible, which is so odd. How did we buy this idea of hell? It's just not even there. But translation bias has kind of done that. But back to your question a little bit. When I was younger, I suppose I didn't have such a strong theology and understanding of hell in either version of the ones that I grew up that I later developed. But it was more just, if you don't believe God's going to send you to this horrible place where you suffer and burn forever, and fire and brimstone burn through your veins, and you're always on fire and you're always hurting. And so it's like, so what do you want? You want to go to hell with this fire and brimstone burn? You want this loving God named Jesus? And no matter how much of a tyrant this God was, I'm like, I'll take God. Like, who wants that? Like, as a kid, Jesus Christ, it doesn't take much to scare the crap out of you to make you avoid that at all costs. I mean, who wants, like, I touched my finger on the stove once, and that burned so bad, I never wanted that again. So tell me that's going to happen in my veins forever and ever. I'm like, no, thank you. I'll take God, whoever he is. You know what I mean? So the decision was never between something great that I actually desired and something that I hated. It was something I hated and something I hated less. That's really what it comes down to, because if you were to ask me, choose between reincarnation and hell, I'd be like, reincarnation sounds wonderful. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But that wasn't the option. It was either God, who is like, you don't really care about, but, he's better than this option. Yeah. It's
like the choice between burnt at the stake or firing squad. Well, I know which one I like the least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as far as you can remember, because I remember growing up and as a child, because I think it's the price of being indoctrinated into fundamentalism as a young child. I was all in from a very young age, and all the way through my teens, I was all in on Christianity, and into a young adult, I was all in on Christianity. Was that pretty much the same for you?
100%. I mean, bro, I can tell you, with all these, messages I'm sending and talking about how my fear of, hell was worse than my desire to love God, whatever. But I still somewhere along the line developed this intense passion for God's word. I don't know why. The Bible and maybe it's because it was instilled in me that this is the most important thing I can ever do with my life. And because I trusted my parents, which children do. That's what you're supposed to do. And
Yeah.
because they instilled this, this thought in me, which I call brainwashing, they just pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. And all I ever knew was God, 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 the Bible,
Yeah.
Bible, Bible. You're like, well, I guess this is my life. So I can either become passionate about it or I can be miserable. So I chose to be passionate about it. And
Yeah.
I chased it with every ounce of my being. And I just got so inundated in God and his word. You could never shake me, man. It was just like, that was the most important thing in my life. So yeah, 100%. I went with it like a whirlwind, man. I was in 100%.
So then you ended up as a pastor. Do I remember right?
Yeah,
So
that's correct.
at what point did you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
So when I was a teenager in youth ministry, I was nearing the end of my teenage years, but I was still in youth ministry, and I had gone through several youth pastors, and I had always been so appreciative of the youth pastors that I had. Some were better than others, but overall I had really good experiences. And I remember that the way they would teach inspired me even more to love God's word, and I always had a gift of speaking. Like I could just talk like nobody else. I don't know if you call that a gift or a curse, but I just talk, and I loved getting in front. The bigger the crowd, the better. I don't know what it was about me. I just loved being in front of a public audience. Some people would rather kill themselves than that, and I get that. But me, goodness, give me the greatest audience, And so combining that with the passion I have for the Bible and the youth pastor, I remember from pretty young on in my teenage years being like, I want to grow up to be a youth pastor because I can think of nothing better to do with my life than to teach teenagers to love God's word. And that's where I was. And I really believe that if I could just get teenagers to be passionate about God and his word, I could change the world. That was my view. That's where I was. Yeah, 100%.
I did teenage youth work for about 15 years. And yeah, I loved it. It's very rewarding. Some great relationships. Some of those teenagers are adult friends now. They've got their own children. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was massively rewarding.
Yeah, it was. It was very rewarding for me. And what's funny, and I'll tell you something humorous here, is now that I'm an atheist, right, and I make these posts on my Facebook wall, now I've got my teenagers that I taught how to respond to atheists. They're using all the stuff that I taught them against me and my posts.
Excellent.
Actually.
Brilliant. Oh, teenagers, they're such a pain in the butt. They really are.
Yeah, right. They will come back to haunt you, I tell you that.
Oh, my daughter's now 20, so we've gone through the teenage years, and I've said this before, and I do love saying it. I brought her up to answer me back. I mean, that wasn't a conscious strategy. The strategy was somebody who feels free to have conversations with me about anything in a way that I didn't feel free with my parents. So that was my motivation. That was my strategy. But the kicker in that strategy is having those conversations, and freedom to have those conversations means they're going to answer back. And it means if you've bollocksed up, if you've done something to embarrass them, if you've done something to upset them or their friends, they'll tell you, and they won't be kind about it.
Right. Right.
So God bless you, darling. If you ever listen to this, I do love you. Yeah.
And there we go. Cut cape.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
This is the end of Matthew Taylor right here.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, but it means I've got a healthy relationship with my grown-up daughter. She's 20. I guess she is a grown-up. And that's what I want. Frankly, yeah. But it's not been an easy path, and I've learned a lot along the way. And I'm glad I was in my 40s when she was a teenager and not in my 30s, because I was a better parent for it.
Right on.
But yeah. That's a different story for a different podcast. So you became a pastor. How long were you a pastor, Alan, before cracks started to show?
Oh boy, how long was I pastor? I would say about 20 years as a pastor, 10-ish as a youth pastor.
Right.
And then, no,
And
I
you
guess
got the
it
promotion.
had to have been like 23 years, because it would have been 13 years as a lead pastor, as a pastor, senior pastor, so to speak. So 10 years with Lift Church, and then I had 3 years before that where we were just kind of trying to figure things out and bouncing between names or whatever. So I'd say about 23 years youth pastor / pastor. And then on top of that, there was about a 2-year transition period before I hit atheism. So I left being a pastor. My church was shut down. I was no longer pastoring. And then bam, I became an atheist. So that's the real quick summary version.
Before we get on to the book then and your motivations behind that, what were the cracks for you? What was it that first got you stepping out?
It's such a great question. And that question is sort of what drove me to end up writing my book, because Jen Fishbourne first asked me that in my interview with her. And she was the first person that I had come out of the closet with, so to speak, as an atheist. And she asked me a very similar question. What was it that, made you become an atheist or leave Christianity? And I remember scratching my head in that question, because I don't know why I didn't think of it. Here we are doing an interview as an atheist, but for some reason that question wasn't so pervasive to me until she asked it just like that. And I thought, I don't know. Why was this so easy? It was like I had been a pastor pretty much my whole adult life. As a teenager, I always loved God. From a childhood, I was leading my family in devotions. Everything I did, my entire life was about God, God, God. That's all I wanted in life. Understanding the Bible. I wrote 2 books, biblically driven, all about the interpretation of Scripture. Just passionate. All I ever cared about was living for the Lord. And then one day it was like quite literally this simple. Instantly, wow. I was just like, and the moment, the final straw. So I can easily tell you the final straw, and then I will go back and answer your question. The final straw was prayer. I remember walking around, because I used to do prayer walks, trying to get because this was after my divorce, after I lost my church, after everything. I was a complete mess, right? And I had been going through therapy for about 2 years, and I was recovering. And I was in a much better place by this point. I was much stronger in my head. I was much more solid emotionally, and I was still doing prayer walks and just trying to re-find God, if you will, just trying to reconnect. And I would pray, and I would do this prayer walk. And one day I was on this prayer walk, and I just stopped mid-sentence. I don't even remember what I was praying, but I stopped mid-sentence, and I said, what am I doing? Like, who am I talking to? There's nobody there. I'm talking to the air. Because there was no connection anymore. It was just gone. And it was that very moment that I just said, and quite literally, Matthew, quite literally, much like you had to do when you said you had to express it verbally, it was in that moment that I said, I'm an atheist. It was weird. Like, there was nobody there for me in that moment. It was just me and my verbalization to God through prayer, whatever, and I just, that was it. That was the cutoff moment for me. And I just quite literally became an atheist in that moment. But I had to verbalize it. I had to actually say out loud, I'm an atheist, or I would have continued to be stuck in that trap. But I had to actually just realize and come to the recognition of what I actually believe now. Because prior to that moment, I really believed God existed. And now in this moment, I realized I no longer believed. So I had to say it out loud. So I heard it from myself, that this is my new status and this is what I'm going to do with my life. So that was an absolute incredible moment for me. So that was the final straw, was prayer. But I will honestly say, through my evaluation, and again, I deal a lot of this with my book, it started years before that. I just didn't know it started years before that. Every single time I would journey forward in understanding something better about life, and even understanding the Bible better, if you will, there was a layer of brainwashing that was being removed. First thing was escaping the mainstream Christian view of hell, for example. That went away. And then there's the premillennial view of the coming of Christ, and that went away. Then there's, post-millennialism come in, that, God's coming, this is the golden age. And so that whole instantaneous, imminent thing disappeared. And then there was partial preterism, and then there was full preterism, and then there was covenant creation, and one step at a time, all of these, boom, brainwash. And then a friend of mine talking to me about the mythologies that the Bible was built on and how it's so similar with all these stories, another layer. But none of them were enough by themselves to just wake me up. But over a course of many, many years, without me even realizing, but just studying and continuing to listen and learn, as layers of brainwashing peeled away, it turns out that layer of brainwashing called prayer was the final one, and it was gone. And I think that's the way it works for everybody. I just don't think most of us realize as Christians that that's the way it works. Most ex-Christians or atheists, ex-Christians, most ex-Christians don't ever take the time to think about why they escaped, but it's usually not just one pill. It's usually a series of layers over the course of many years for those of us who are willing to continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to study, and continue to peel layers, because we're just never satisfied, because we can always see something's not right. And we can't quit until we know what is right. And that's what gets us to where we are today, Matthew. And I think it was probably the same for you, but I will let you talk now and express that.
Well, dear listeners, reminder, we are talking to Alan about his book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. And you mentioned a few moments ago about an interview with Jen Fishbourne, I think it is. I will look up that YouTube video. Check the show notes. You know by now, if you're a regular listener, I always have links in my show notes about things that are in the conversation. So link to the book we're talking about, link to Alan's other books are in the show notes, and other YouTube content and interviews that Alan mentions along this conversation, I'll find they'll be in the show notes. So please check the show notes. And maybe if you're lucky, there'll also be a link to buy Apostate, Stories of Deconversion. That book that I wrote in chapter 2. Show notes, ladies and gentlemen, my wonderful listeners. There's always information there. There is a gold mine of stuff there. So, Alan, I've spent the last 2 weeks reading. I'm a slow reader, and your book at over 400 pages meant that it took me a little bit more effort than some books that I've had to read. And wow, what a slog your book was. And I don't mean that pejoratively. You hit it with a really bold title, and you cover an awful lot of ground in your book. And while your language is gentle, your tone is very firm. And I felt that reading the book. And certainly if I still had sympathies for Christianity, honestly, I'd have had a difficult time reading your book. And so I suspect that any Christian will have a challenging time reading the book. And now that, again, that's not a criticism. The thing that edged me out and to investigate more and got me on that treadmill out of Christianity was having really tough conversations about evolution, conversations that hurt me cognitively. So that isn't a bad thing, but it does mean that some people won't cope. So the way I want to get into talking about your book first is, the first thing I want to know is, why did you choose to write the book the way that it is, to cover so much subject material and to write it in the tone that you wrote it?
As far as content, I really felt like I wanted the book to be exhaustive.
Yeah.
Because the one thing I didn't want is for someone to say, aha, he didn't deal with this. I knew he could do that. And I didn't want to. So
because not mentioning one thing is the obvious fatal flaw in all the things that you do mention.
Exactly. Right. In that mentality. So before I released it, I was like, I really was committed to being as exhaustive as possible. I can tell you, Matthew, I listened to more debates than anybody should ever have to endure in a lifetime. I listened to any and every podcast I could possibly find. I found new authors, read books, did anything I could. I wanted to know every argument any Christian has ever presented against atheism. I wanted to include it in the book. That was super important to me, because I just, like I said, I didn't want them getting to the end of it and being like, well, this was just not worth it because he didn't cover my issue. Ironically, I still have Christians that have read it and say, oh, it was just a straw man. You didn't deal with my issue. And I'm just like, I mean, there's just no winning. And it's awesome. It's still apparently a straw man to some Christians. So I think it comes down to the fact that Christians don't want to let go of their belief, and they will find any excuse to hold on to it. And I understand that. I do, because as a Christian, until all the layers were gone, I would have done the same thing. So I do understand that. My goal in writing the book, the way I wrote it, and the reason it took so many pages and why it's as exhaustive and over 400 pages, is because when you're removing layers of brainwashing, you can't do it in 50 pages.
No.
It's just not the way it works. Just presenting a solid argument that destroys a position doesn't work. And I can tell you it doesn't work because I've seen plenty of debates where I've seen cogent arguments on both sides of the issue where somebody would absolutely and utterly destroy another position, but that person on the other side still holds their ground, still walks away believing what they believe. And I'm just like, how do you still think the way you do after that person just utterly destroyed logically your position? So I realized that people don't get logicized into Christianity. They're not going to get logicized out of it.
No, you're right.
I'm not going to be able to convince them just by making all the grand arguments. And there's a lot of really good atheist books that will destroy all of the logical arguments of Christianity, or the illogical arguments, I should say, but all the attempted arguments. But that's not going to make a believer become an unbeliever. They're not going to change their mind by that. That's all that's going to do is take them off. So my goal was to take them through piece by piece and say, hey, what about this view that you love? What about this view that's so great? And I paint the view, and then I show why it's flawed, and I take it away from them, and I take it away from them, and I take it away from them, one step at a time for 400 pages. And I repeat, and I repeat, and I repeat. That's the way you have to undo brainwashing. Otherwise, you'll never get through. So that was my goal in the book. I was firm because I needed to show them that I'm not wavering. I'm not being half-hearted here. At the end of every chapter, you need to understand that what you thought was true with this view is just not true. Boom. And I needed to hit it hard. Otherwise, if I were to hit too soft in every chapter, it could have taken me 1,400 pages. So I needed to somehow limit it to 400 something. You know, I wasn't even trying to go that long. In fact, my final version was 440. I cut out 20 pages before I even released the book because I was really frustrated about how long it was. But I just didn't know how else to conquer this, because this isn't like, and in the book, I draw a parallel between smoking and the addiction of Christianity, also alcohol and Christianity, and gambling and Christianity, any addictions. It's an addiction that I'm helping free people from. The difference is when it comes to just smoking or just alcohol or just, gambling, whatever, there's so much less to deal with than a Christian worldview, because dealing with theism, bro, I mean, it's so vast. You're dealing with a whole Bible that's just gigantic, and that's got so many views. I mean, there are 45,000 denominations worldwide of Christianity that you're just like, how do you even cover everything? So I did my best to try to tackle it in a most broadest sense I could, while also being specific. So this was a very challenging work. It was very, very difficult to nail it down to where everybody who read it would be impacted by it in some way. But there was no way to do it where I wasn't going to piss off some Christians. I knew that was going to happen. It was just impossible not to. So I took the approach I did simply because I had to do something that was going to nail all the arguments, was going to do it as concisely as possible, but was also going to be as broadly soft where I could remove layers as necessary without taking forever to do it. The title of the book, I called it that because it's what the book's about. So at the end of the day, there was a lot of different titles I could have given it, but my thought was, why not just call the book what it's about? And in doing so, I thought to myself, if I were a Christian still as a pastor and I was walking through a bookstore and I saw this title, I can tell you right now, there is no way in hell I wouldn't have stopped to at least take a peek in the pages. It's so provocative that I would have had to have said, what? That's interesting. You can't just walk past that as a Christian. You can't. It's got to intrigue you. So I did something that was going to be provocative enough to at least make a Christian say, I wonder what that's about. So anyway, I hope that answers some of your question of what you were asking. Maybe I went too long, but I tried my best to answer.
Go as long as you want. People are here to hear about you. They're bored of my voice, so talk as long as you want. I like that answer, and I like a bit of abrasiveness. I think there comes a point where you just got to stop holding hands and say it as it is. And I'm at that stage in my life, in my podcasting mood. I'm very much like that. I do occasional episodes where I review some Christian content, and those episodes tend to get sweary and sarcastic, because I think abrasiveness is sometimes required. And I like your logic. Calling a book like that is going to cause somebody curious to pick it up. And if the words there are too nice, they're too easy to dismiss. So I'm sold on it. I read all the way through the book. It would have been hard for me to read as a believer. There's no two ways around it. So I guess what that leads to is my next question is, who do you want to read this book?
Christians. And when all right, so you may not know about this detail. When I released, before I went public with, before I published it, my very, very first final version that I had before I published, I wanted to do a test case release. So I opened up the book to anybody who was, any Christian, it had to be a Christian, any Christian who was willing to read this book as a test case.
Right.
And they had to read the book, and then they had to give me their survey results. And I had a survey page on my website, which is still there, but for anybody who still wishes to do it, but they were required to do it. So they had an opportunity. You get my book for free, but you have to read it, and you have to give me your results.
Right.
I didn't know what the results were going to be. Obviously, I wrote the book with a Christian audience in mind, because obviously it's not going to be hard to convince an atheist of what I'm saying. So my goal was to help convince Christians that they're living a life, that's wasting, a life. It's a waste of life. It's not real. They're living for Santa Claus, basically. So I wanted to convince them of that. So that's who I wrote the book for. So I released it to a test audience, and I had 40 people that were willing to be test cases. What I found interesting, and this helped me determine a little bit more specifically who my target audience became when I published it. Everybody who read the book that was a staunch Christian going into reading it, they went into reading it to prove me wrong. They went into reading it, you're not going to convince me, I'm just going to show you. So they never read it with the pure intention of just letting what I'm saying engage their head. So like you said, it wouldn't have convinced you as a Christian, because most Christians, let's face it, when we read anything that's not Christian, we immediately have a stiff arm towards it. And that is a necessary thing you have to do as a Christian. And the reason is because you have no evidence for your faith as a Christian. You just have faith. Faith is not evidential based. It is just faith. It's nothing. It's just, I believe because I want to believe. There's no grounds to it. It's just, as I wrote in a book, you're literally quite brainwashed to just believe what you believe. There's no substance to it whatsoever. So when you just have faith and you have no grounding for it, you don't want to be wrong until those layers are removed and you wake up. But prior to that, you will not be wrong on any grounds. You refuse to be wrong. I can't be wrong. This is my life. God is my life. I need God. It's like an addict. I mean, you sound like an addicted person. I need my drugs. I can't live without. I need my hit. Right? I mean, that's the way addicts do. And as a Christian, you're the same way. I need God. I need God. That's why I parallel, because I think it's identical. And when you're brainwashed to believe you need this thing, you will continue to fight tooth and nail to make sure nobody can take this away from you. You gotta have it. So if you read the book like that, of course it's not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Just like no book's going to help you. No debate. Like I explained earlier, I've seen debates where positions were utterly destroyed, but that person who came in refused to accept anything that was said because they're going to leave with their pride. I know I'm right. So when you go into the book like that, it's not going to convince you. So what I discovered through my test cases and all the results that I got back, any Christian who was full-fledged Christian going into it believing that this book would never convince them, they came out believing same way. Nothing in this book convinced them. Understood. But fascinating, Matthew, 100% every Christian that went into reading this book that had questions, that said, I don't know, there's some things that I see that are kind of off about Christianity. I'm struggling. I'm not really sure where I stand. I'm having a hard time. 100% of them came out on the other side as atheists.
Wow.
So what I discovered about this book is that it 100% will remove the brainwashing if you're willing to let it do its job. If you have enough questions that you're willing to say, maybe, just maybe, there's something off about what I believe. If you go into it with that attitude, it will absolutely work.
Excellent. And on that note, and I planned to say this anyway at this point, but thank you for the perfect segue. Listeners, if you are a sympathetic agnostic or somebody who's a Christian but is wondering or having challenges with part of your faith, I do recommend this book. Genuinely, I do. Some parts of it you might find difficult, as I've already alluded to. That's fine. What this book does do is lay out some really serious issues with Christianity. And it's not unkind about it. It just doesn't nanny you. And so read the book and see how you come with it. And if you have any feedback on the book and you can't find Alan, reasonpress@gmail.com is the email to find me on. And I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to find Alan and pass any feedback. But please read the book. Let me know what you think about it. I'm interested to know what you think about it.
If I may, me too, ALAN, Alan at howtokillgod.com. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from people too. I would love to hear from you personally if you don't feel comfortable sharing publicly. I don't even care one way or the other, but I would love to hear your feedback because personally, I would be willing to improve this book in any way, shape, or form because I'm passionate about freeing people. So if there's parts of this book that are not doing the job, I would love to know about it.
If you didn't catch that email address, show notes, you know where to go. Always there. Right. So, Alan, one of the things that intrigued me about this book was because there was so much that was covered, so much that you wrote, so much study that you had to do in preparation. Obviously, you had years and years of previous experience, and a lot of it you could just bash out, but you still needed to research for some of it. What was the hardest chapter for you to write?
The hardest chapter was actually the preface.
Right.
Because I wrote the book. And then I sat back and I said, how the hell am I going to get anybody to read this? Right? I mean, how do you get a Christian to read a book about destroying Christianity? Mm-hmm. So I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I was like, I went with it first. I got it done. And then I was like, what am I going to do with this preface? Like, how do you intrigue somebody? Like the title's intriguing, sure. Mm. And that's enough to make me pick it up. But if I can't sell me in that first preface, I'm going to put it down and I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what I was going to do. So I had a preface and I wrote a preface. And the original preface, if you think the rest of the book is somewhat firm, you should have read my first preface. Like the preface was pretty much as harsh as it could be. It just showed all of the problems throughout history that Christianity has caused in the world, like from murders to crusades to suicides to children believing things that aren't true to fear tactics to you name it, all of the detrimental aspects. And it was pretty harsh. So my original thought was if I can get Christians to read that, they'll be like, oh my goodness, this might be brainwashing. What if I'm wrong? But I had a couple of people check it out. One person in particular, Dustin Curley, my friend, who was one of the editors of the book, who ended up being the preface writer of the book. And the reason was he read that and he said, bro, if you release this book with that preface, nobody's going to read it. He was like, that is so harsh. Nobody's going to give you a second. So I said, wow. And I threw my hands up and I said, I don't know what to do, Dustin. I have no idea how I'm going to get somebody to read this book. I said, why don't you write the preface? I bet you'll have a much softer approach because now you've read the book and you know what would intrigue somebody. And that's how the preface came about the way it is. So that was by far the hardest chapter. And even after he wrote it, we had to tweak it quite a bit because it was just, how do you get somebody intrigued in a book like this? Like it was tough, very, very difficult. Because I'm not like the other atheist books. And look, Matthew, my thing is, I'm not one to just write a book that just does the same thing everybody else does. If I'm going to do that, that's a waste of time because it's already done. And if it's already done, it's probably done better than I can ever do anyway. If I'm not going to have an original idea, if it's not going to be something unique that can contribute to the conversation, then I'm not going to write it. So this book was an attempt to do something unique. It wasn't about just attacking all of the Christian views. It was about entering in with the Christian, starting them in the journey with me and saying, hey, I know how you feel. Hey, I was here. Hey, I understand what hope you have. Let me show you what I think our hope is. It's not there anymore. This is not what you hope. Hey, I know what you thought about all of these views, all of these apologetical things that you think, believe, prove the existence. I used to think that. Let me show you why they don't actually do what you think they do. So I really wanted to take that approach because it's different. It's not in, I'm going to attack you first. It's in a, I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about what we started with, where we both thought was right, and I'm going to show you why it's not. So anyway, I guess in some ways I'm blabbering, but I'm hoping, again, I'm answering your question about the toughest.
Praise the universe for honest friends.
Yeah.
No. Following on from that, then, in the various people who have read this book, because apart from the group that you've mentioned, I assume other Christians have also read the book. What chapter has had the most pushback?
So, probably the chapter that I have gotten the most pushback on is chapter 3 on hope, why it's so difficult to leave Christianity. And I have expanded on that chapter since I've gotten the pushback, so it's far more elaborate now than it was. But the reason I've gotten the most pushback on the chapter, and that's the chapter where I talk about the different views of eternal life, the different views of heaven, and why people bank their hope on living forever with God in heaven. I really did try my best in this chapter, even in the first try, to cover as much of the spectrum of beliefs of the afterlife as I could. Come to find out, there's more. It never ends. It's like no matter how much you try to say broadly, this is what some believe, and this is another view, and this is another view, and I think I've covered all of them. Somebody comes along and they say, hey, that's a straw man. I don't believe that. And I say, okay, well, what's your view? Well, I believe we're going to be like Mission Impossible agents that God sends to different universes that we don't even know about, and they go and preach the gospel to them. And I'm like, holy cow, seriously? So now we're just making stuff up, right? We're just making anything up we can that makes our view of heaven sound wonderful, because there is no wonderful view of heaven, obviously, because otherwise we'd have stopped making up views long ago. But there's no content view. So Christians are forever making up some view about the eternal life that makes us feel good about where we're going. And so I listened to all of these criticisms, and I listened to the results that I got from the test cases, and even the people since then, and I've updated it since then, and the new book that's up now even has newer versions of it. But it's like never ending. There are so many views about the afterlife, and I'm just like, at what point does this end? Where do I draw a line where I stop trying to incorporate the newest, greatest view of heaven, where I'm not being told I'm presenting a straw man? It just becomes ludicrous, man. Like, it really does. So that's been the biggest pushback, is the whole, this is a straw man because I don't believe that view of heaven. I have my own. Okay, you have your own. Wonderful. So you know what I mean? That's where I'm at. That is perpetual frustration to me.
It's funny you should mention that, because I've not told any of my listeners this, although I have fed back to the author. My most popular episode of 2024 was an interview with an author and his book about hell. And that episode's gone out, and that is my most listened to episode of the whole of 2024. So clearly it is a subject that people are passionate about, and clearly it is a subject that people want to talk about it. So quick plug, episode 108, Holy Hell, A Case Against Eternal Damnation, written by the pastor Derek Kubilis. That is my most listened to episode of 2024. Go and dig it out, the archives, make it the most listened to episode of 2025, if you dare. Because hell is clearly something that people want to talk about, or want to read about, or want to learn about, or have difficulty with, and they're trying to soak up information. And brandishing a book saying you've got a case against eternal damnation, I can see that being very attractive.
Yeah, no, sure. I've also had conversations with people about my chapter on hell, but I will tell you that hasn't nearly had the traction as my chapter on heaven.
Right.
For some reason, the people who have read the chapter on hell have been like, "What? Hell's not in the Bible?" Like, people are shocked. I've been like, the afterlife in general is huge. So yes, heaven and hell for a lot of people has a gigantic. So they're almost synonymous, really. And when it comes to the stress of leaving Christianity, obviously, I know of people who still, as atheists, 15 years later, are still having nightmares about hell.
Yeah.
It's sad, bro. That's sad. Like, that breaks my heart. I'm like, you're still struggling? Like, holy cow, like, that's some deep indoctrination. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it happens, and it's absolutely sad. But yeah, so heaven, hell. But in my chapter on hell, I mean, I just completely dispel the whole doctrine of hell altogether. So there's just nothing to hell. But the doctrine of heaven, at least the Bible uses the term. Even in the original language, it's there. Heaven, skies. I mean, I know but I can see where the doctrine came from. But hell, it's not even in the Bible. Like, Gehenna is the closest we get to hell. It's not even the word for hell. So it's bizarre that doctrine ever got even visited. I don't even know how that developed. It's weird.
I've seen people, because I'm a member of multiple Facebook groups that talk about deconstruction from Christianity or deconversion, and I love seeing the way the communities in those groups help each other out. And the issue of hell comes up occasionally. And one particularly frustrating story that I had, again, this is a true story, a conversation I had with a parent who admitted to me that their child had said that they'd lain in bed at night worried about their own future fate. And this is a child that's a young teen stroke preteen. And this is what the doctrine of hell taught in Sunday school does to children. And I, frankly, will never forgive Christianity for doing that to a dear friend's child, because it's just abuse.
It absolutely is abuse. I saw a meme just this week where Jesus is talking to a child in heaven, and the child is asking, "Where's my mother?" And Jesus says to the child, "Well, she's in hell because she's an atheist." And she says, "Well, where is the man who raped her?" "Well, he's in heaven because he was a Christian."
Yeah.
I mean, that's sick.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, there he is. Let's go say hi to him." Like, I know we don't like to think about those things. Just like as Christians, you don't like to think about how the flood destroyed babies that are drowning and dying, and all these people that are innocent, like literally never did anything, but they're just drowning because God's just doing fun. All we ever want to focus on is the rainbow. But like, bro, there's so many horrible stories in the Bible that if you actually pay attention and let it play out in your head and realize details of it, it just makes you want to throw up. Like, I can't even believe that I used to think that this God was a loving God and that he was wonderful. He's nothing but a narcissistic, horrible, evil God that's just like has no moral compass whatsoever. It is just sick.
Yeah. Has the moral compass of an ancient male-dominated group of people who liked to fight at the weekends.
Yes.
Frankly.
Yes, exactly. And I really wanted people to understand which God they're worshiping in my book. I tried really hard to paint that picture, but as you said, maybe it's just too hard for Christians to swallow. I don't know.
Okay. So let's change tack a bit. Let's tell you about my favorite part of the book, and I'm hoping this will be amusing, and I hope this will be fun. It's a very tiny part of your book, and because I've been doing this for 5 years, I've exposed myself to lots and lots of Christian content. I still listen to many Christian podcasts on a daily basis on my commute into work. I'm still hoovering up all of this stuff, so I'm a bit like you. I've heard it all. So there was nothing in your arguments that wasn't new to me in the sense, oh, I've never heard a Christian say this, or I've never heard this response to this, because I've been there, but I did like that it was all together. So the gem in the book, you brought up something that from memory I've only encountered once before and had forgotten about it, and your book brought it back as a fresh memory, and it was like, yes, why did I forget about that? I need to remember that more, and I need to bring it up because there are other examples that are related to this that I can also bring up about what is faulty about the compilation of the Bible. And this is it. It's the resurrection of Lazarus. And why is that the last time you ever hear about Lazarus? Why was Lazarus not world famous after that? Why is there not an interview about Lazarus after that? Why did everybody suddenly forget that he ever existed? Yeah. Why is there not a book of Lazarus saying what he did after, about how wonderful he was and what the experience in death was like for him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So thank you for reminding me of that, and thank you for putting in. That was my little treasure from your book.
Well, you're welcome. You had to dig real hard for that one.
It proves I read it.
Yeah, it does prove you. Yeah. Boy, I had to read through this trudgery to find this one golden nugget. I found it though. Too funny.
Yeah. So that was that. So read the book for that, if for nothing else. But no, genuinely, look, I love chatting with you, Alan. You're brilliant. You're effervescent. Nobody's going to see the image that I'm seeing in front of you. You're very Italian with your hands, which is wonderful. And I'm having a great time talking to you. So, what was the bit that you had the most fun in writing of this book, apart from the Lazarus bit, obviously?
Yeah. Well, the most fun, I would say, is a toss-up between the apologetics chapter, because it was very fun for me to reveal how it's nothing more than circular reasoning on every single argument. That was fun. I enjoyed that. And that's sort of because I'm far more cerebral than I am emotional. That I'm a very cerebral person. So you're going to find that chapter to be extremely cerebral, and it's a very tough. I've heard that's probably what I've heard is the most difficult chapter to get through my book, and it's early on as well. So I've heard people say it's like chewing through mud to get through that. Unfortunately, dealing with apologetics is like chewing through mud. So
yes,
it is.
It's a tough subject. I get very bored listening to apologists because they use 25,000 words when 3 will do. And so countering all the gunk they put out is equally tedious, and it's necessary because of what they put out.
And it is. And you have to deal with it. I tried to keep it as succinct as I could, but they're just terrible arguments. They're terrible. Yeah. They don't prove what they say they prove at all. And so
no.
It was an essential chapter. It's not one that I really wanted to write because I knew that it would bog people down, but it's essential. If you're going to write a book like this, you can't just not deal with apologetics.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to. So if you can get through that chapter, the rest is a lot lighter than that chapter. But at any rate, some people who are more cerebral like me, that's going to be your favorite chapter because I really enjoyed that. But I would say the other part for me that was good was responding to some of my critics and public rebukes and people who tried to save me again in my later chapters, probably, chapters 38, 39, 40, those kinds of chapters, real late in the book, where I talk about the people who I did those things and I get to respond to them because I didn't really get a chance to respond to them publicly, even though they attacked me publicly and presented quite a few really horrible statements about me, bringing up old letters, things from 5 years ago that had nothing to do with me now, just some really horrible stuff. And I sat on that for a number of years. I let it simmer. I talked to counsel rather than responding in the moment and bringing people into the limelight that I knew didn't want to be brought into it, which was why I didn't mention them in the first place in my interview. I really wanted my coming out as an atheist to be dealt with by those in the theological world on the grounds of my atheistic arguments alone. Yeah. I didn't want them to do ad hominem attacks. I was hoping that they wouldn't start to talk about my past life from 5 years beforehand saying, oh, well, he's a sinner because he did this and that's why you can't. That has nothing to do with me being an atheist. Like, attack my arguments. I'm fine with that. We can talk all day long about the argument, but don't start bringing up ad hominem attacks and saying that my arguments aren't solid and don't have any grounds because I sinned once in my life. Like, I just got very irritated by that. And I really wanted to come out vehemently and attack these people when they first brought those arguments out, but I didn't. I bit my tongue. I bet my time, and I waited until I wrote the book where I could calmly and methodically respond to them in a way that didn't humiliate them publicly because nobody knows their name. But I responded to their statements to show that it was entirely fallacious. But what I did by doing that is show that as an ex-Christian, you're going to face these kinds of attacks, especially if you were in a position like I was when I was a Christian, as a pastor, a public speaker, somebody who was invited to conferences, somebody who had somewhat of a following. You leave, and these other pastors, they don't know what to do with you because their flock, so to speak, the people in their church, they're all freaking out. They're saying, well, I don't understand. How did Alan Bondar leave Christianity, or whatever? And they don't know what to say to these people, so they just attack my character. That's not cool. That's just not cool. That is not the way that you approach the response to an atheist. Just because you have nothing to say to their arguments does not give you the right to attack their character. So I gotta say, like, to answer your question, that was probably my favorite part. Was I finally had the opportunity after years of biding my time and being patient to respond to all of those attacks and show how they have no bearing whatsoever on what I was actually saying. So.
No, that is actually quite despicable, and you do hint at that going on in your book, and I had the predictable anger response when I read about that. But at the same time, unfortunately, I also wasn't surprised. It's just pointing out right at this moment, there's a well-known former Christian apologist who in the last year has come out as no longer believing. And crumbs, it was literally only last month, I think, I found an apologetics organization had put out a nearly 3-hour video completely attempting to dismantle this guy's deconstruction, and included in all the notes is, look at that, look at his divorce, here's the link to the court papers for his divorce, he is not a character that you can trust when it comes to his deconversion. I'm like, dude, well, it's the same thing that you've just said. You're making a personal attack to try to discredit an intellectual argument. It doesn't work.
And that's right. And it doesn't. And those who can actually see straight can realize that has no bearing on the actual content of what the person's saying. Like, I could be Hitler, for crying out loud, and still present a cogent argument about something. Just because I'm Hitler doesn't make my argument incorrect.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it may be a horrible person, but that doesn't make my particular argument about something incorrect. You still got to deal with that content.
Yes.
That's the problem, is I don't think Christians know how to deal with the content of atheists. They don't know what to do with it, so they just attack the character.
Yeah.
And that's just not. Yeah. It's frustrating.
And so, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that was good for me. It was, like I said, part of why I wrote my book was that it was therapeutic for me. I needed that. And it allowed me to release some of the anger that I had from that. So that was good.
Excellent. And brief point on the whole thing about Christians being obsessed with pureness of character. It is January the 20th today. Who have Christians put into power?
Yes, they have. Valid point.
As a Brit, let's move on before this. So
I understand you don't want it to be political, but I feel your pain, dude. I'm with you. I get it. Yeah. Let's have a moment of silence.
Yeah. Yes. Moments of silence as we mourn the integrity of the people we once looked up to. Right, moving on. The favourite part, apart from that Lazarus gem, the bit I really appreciated in your book is right at the very end of the book. There's a very noticeable change in gear, and you change tone, you change gear, you become a pastor again, and you talk about finding community post-Christianity with some very good practical advice, some hints, some personal experience, and it's beautifully written. And I'm really, really glad that that is in the book. I think the book is so much better for having that in at the end. So listeners, again, make it through the book and read the last chapters and enjoy them for what they are. Was that intentional to put those last couple of chapters in, or was that a later addition?
No, it was definitely intentional. Before I even started writing the book, I remember talking to one of my very close friends who was also escaped, kind of like I did. And I told him I think I'm going to write a book. I said, I want to write a book about this. And he said, dude, he's like, how are you going to help heal people in this process? Because he said, you can write a book and you can destroy their faith, and that's great, but what are you going to do for them?
Yeah.
I thought about that. I said, wow, you're right. How am I going to heal them at the same time? So I had a very intentional ending to this book. Like, I'm going to destroy your faith, which is good, actually, even though you don't realize it is going into it. But now that I've done that, I want to help heal you. I want to show you that there is hope, that there is something wonderful on the other side of this. And I want to bring some encouragement to you, because life is much better on this side. It really is. You just don't think it is because you've been brainwashed for so long to think only one way. But if you can get out of that, there are some really awesome things on this side. So yeah, it was intentional.
Excellent. Glad, because it very much was a literary hug, those final chapters. So thank you for that, Alan. And I'm pretty sure that other people who are going to read the book are going to feel the same.
Well, I appreciate that. That actually really encouraged me and blows my mind a little bit, because I did not expect anybody to say the final chapters were the better chapters. That's really, like, I kind of was like, I was so worried about the last chapters. I was like, is this enough? Is this going to wrap up the book? Are people going to be annoyed? That's encouraging. I appreciate it.
It's the perfect ending. It's what your book needed as the ending, to be quite honest. So, no, very, very, very pleased to read those chapters.
Well, I appreciate
really pleased. And so I've got something in my eye. That's definitely not man tears. So there's
I thought you were crying for me. I thought you were so love those last chapters. You were just tearing up, man.
Don't embarrass me. I'm 50 and I'm male. Those things don't happen. All right.
You better stop, or I'm gonna have to fly out there and give you a hug, man.
Oh well, I'm in cider. I'm in this part of the UK which is famous for cider. So when you're here, I will definitely introduce you to some quality ciders, and we'll have a good old man hug over some apple juice with some other bits in it. And it'll be ugly. I promise you, it'll definitely be ugly.
That sounds wonderful, man.
It'll be perfect for TikTok.
Right?
If it's still going by then, that is.
Still going, yeah, right. Oh my goodness, that's too funny. Absolutely hilarious. Oh my.
So we short of me actually getting the book out and reading it, I think we've covered everything that I wanted to talk about. The only other question I wanted to ask about the book, and you kind of hinted at it earlier. So let's concrete this down. Do you really think there's a possibility for a version 2? Do you think there are some of those chapters might get padded out, added to, some new arguments done? We're going to see a 600-page version?
600 paper. I don't know. I can tell you that I have no doubt that at some point there will be a revised version released, because this is my first go at it. Well, second go, I guess, besides my test cases. And, based on feedback I get from you and others, which I hope people give me feedback, because let's face it, if this book is going to be effective long term, I want it to be as good as possible. So I fully expect that over the course of time, as people give me feedback, I'm going to make further tweaks and maybe shorter, maybe longer. I don't know. I don't know which way it'll go. Maybe I need to cut it in half. I don't know. Either way, half, double, same, it doesn't matter. The point is, what's going to be the most effective? I see that as a community project. I want as much feedback as I can. I am not married to this book in a prideful way where it's like, don't tell me what you don't like. I hate it. I don't care. I want it to be great. So I definitely foresee a second version of this in the future. Also, I am working out in my mind a sequel to the book. talking about life beyond Christianity. Like, now that you've escaped and you've healed and you no longer have all that, what do you do next? I want to talk about some of the scientific stuff, some of the things I've been thinking about. What are the questions you're going to get from theists to try to dissuade you from atheism? How do you respond to theists? Like, for example, one of the things that I constantly see when I engage with theists is I'll ask them, to demonstrate through evidence that God does, that God exists. And the response I get is, well, yeah, we'll prove God doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, it's simple. You just say, that isn't my responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm not coming at you saying God doesn't exist. I'm saying prove he does, because you're making the claim. And then theists will want to say, oh yeah, well, you're saying evolution works. Well, prove this and prove that. And I'm like, I don't have to prove that, because I'm neither claiming it is the definitive answer, nor am I even trying to make the claim that it is. You're coming at me saying God exists, and I'm saying, no, he doesn't, because I don't see any evidence. That's the only I don't believe. So all of those kinds of things and how to engage a theist is kind of important, because I don't know what it is about theists, but they have this idea that they are allowed to believe whatever they want to believe as long as nobody can prove it wrong.
Yeah.
Which is super strange, because it's like me saying, as I argue in my book, Goerings, like, I believe in Goerings, prove they don't exist. Well, you can't prove they don't exist because they don't exist to begin with. It's so weird. So things like that, like, I kind of want to help you as an ex-theist. Like, what's your next steps? How do you think in this world outside of Christianity, so that you don't feel out in the cold, not knowing what your next steps are? So that's kind of where I'm thinking. I don't know if that's going to happen, because anytime you write a book, it is a process. It took me 2 years to write this last one, and it takes a lot of time away from your family, and it kills the relationship a little bit for that period of time. So if I do write it, it's probably not going to be anytime soon, but I do have thoughts on it, and I hope to release that at some point, just because, well, when you're a passionate person, you can't help but write. So
of course. I think it's a great book. I think it's worthy of a second edition, and I love your idea. I think something for how to bandage ourselves, how to live better, is definitely something that is needed, that needs to be out there. The communities and the events that are springing up are great. The podcasts of people talking through experiences are great. That's all part of the healing process. I think a book is a great addition to all of that. I think it'll be a brilliant idea. So, Alan, a question that I like to, actually, one more thing just before I get to the final question is, I did the number one mistake. I went and read a couple of reviews of your book, and one made me laugh. It was, why do these people always attack Christianity? Why don't they attack any other concept of God? And I laughed out loud because it was a 1-star review. So that person's obviously never going to listen to my podcast, but let's answer that question, shall we? Why did you just attack Christianity and nothing else?
No, I think it's funny. I just messaged my friend this morning with that exact review, and I said, have you seen this? Like, literally, he gave me a 1-star review for being too focused in my book and not attacking every possible God under the sun. Like, really? Like, do you know how long this book would be if I tried to attack God under the sun? Like, seriously? That merits a 1-star review? Like, I literally said in my book, I'm focused on Christianity. Like, and only because that's where I came out of. So it was not my goal in the book to argue against every possible God. Now, I deal with it in some ways, very, very minorly, but obviously, if you're a Christian and you believe your God is the only God, and I destroy the Christian God, then you're not going to believe in any other God.
No.
So it was just a no-brainer for me as a former Christian to just focus on Christianity, simply because that's the God I knew, So I was just shocked by this, because I was like, what are you asking me to do? That's so weird. Like, like, it wasn't like I came out in the very beginning and said, I'm going to attack every God under the sun and then only attack Christianity. I literally said, this is my focus. And he critiqued the whole book based on the fact that I had that focus instead of every God. It was like, what are you talking? Anyway, yeah, it's so weird, dude. That was so weird. I didn't even know what to do with that comment. It was so bizarre.
It is. I mean, I've had similar questions to myself, and the answer is Christianity is what I know. Christianity is what hurt me. Christianity is what I was indoctrinated into. Yeah, if you want a critique on Islam, I am not that person.
Right.
Go and find an ex-Muslim. They know about Islam. They'll do that job for you. Me,
right.
My job's Christianity.
Yeah, and if you want to have an apologetical debate with me over the existence of any God, fine. I mean, we could do that, and I'll make you prove God, your God, the same way I do the Christian God, and you're going to fall short just like Christians do. That's fine, but it wasn't my goal to do that with every God under this. I mean, do you realize how impossible that would be?
Yeah.
Like, I would literally have to come up with gods. I would have to pretend there are gods to prove that they all don't exist. I would have to come up with Goerings, for example, or what have you, like, let's make up a god, the
I like that one.
Was that?
I like that one.
You like the yeah, that god and the that one too, and every single bro, like, it becomes ridiculous. You like trying to disprove gods that don't exist is the silliest critique I've ever heard in my life.
I know, it's great. Just don't touch the invisible pink unicorn.
Right.
That one's my pet one. You're not allowed to touch that one. Leave that one alone.
Matthew, I'm with you, man. You and I both believe in that one. I have no arguments against that one.
Awesome.
The pink unicorn, that is our survivor.
Absolutely. Right. Before this descends into something bizarre, Alan.
Already?
Oh dear. Do you think the listeners have a sense that we're actually enjoying this conversation? I hope so.
I don't think you have any listeners left. I think it's just you and me now.
It is, right. Guesting on Still Unbelievable next month is Alan. So
Alan and his magical pink unicorn.
Yeah, hey, that's a mental image I do not need. Thank you very much, kind sir.
Now your guest is definitely gone. You have no listeners left.
Okay.
That was the worst review you could have ever done.
Yeah, awful. Yeah, awful. Right. So, final question then, Alan. All my guests, well, most of my guests get this question. Do you have a favorite Bible character, and who is it?
So favorite might be strong because, now that I no longer believe in the Bible, favorite. But I will say that I probably have a infamous favorite character, so to speak, and that would be Peter, the Apostle Peter. Probably because he resembles me quite a bit. He's been known as the apostle that puts his foot in his mouth and doesn't know when to shut up, and just always speaks out of turn. And next thing you know, he's like, "Oh man, I did it again." That's kind of like me. I do that a lot. So I guess I relate to his character quite a bit in the Bible. So I suppose if I were to choose a favorite infamous character, he would be the one, Peter.
Excellent. I wouldn't have predicted an apostle from you, Alan. I do sometimes like to try and guess who I'm going to get from a guest, and occasionally I've been close, but apostle definitely wasn't there. I was thinking you'd probably pick someone obscure or minor prophet or something like that. That's where I was going with my prediction for you. So
cool. Tell me, who are you thinking?
I wasn't thinking anyone specific, but it was that kind of thing I was wondering. It's going to be someone obscure because he's definitely going to have a good knowledge. So
like Hezekiah.
Something like that, or maybe Micah or something like that. So I was wondering that sort of area, but I was definitely thinking Old Testament rather than New Testament. So yeah, I was completely wrong on that one. But Peter's probably a good one. I think I've had a Peter previously. I think people like Peter. They like that he messes up. They like he ballsed up, but apparently still came good in the end. But Paul eclipsed him in the end as well. So, but yeah, Peter's probably. I imagine that of all the apostles, Peter was probably the one who was most fun down the pub.
Oh, absolutely. And I like to think of myself as fun. So that's a good point. So, I mean, if I were to think of who you would be, I would think Mordecai. Like you're a Mordecai for me.
Mordecai, is that that's the uncle of Esther,
right?
or something? Is that right?
Yeah, that's the one. So that would be like when I think of you, I'm like, oh, Mordecai. But who would you? I don't know if you've ever been faced the question, but what about you? Who would be your person?
No one's ever turned that round on me. That's so unfair. And you know what? I don't know who to pick. I've thought through this about who I would pick, and I really, really don't know. And I've even tried to think who it would have been when I was a Christian, and it probably would have been one of the apostles when I was a Christian. But who would it be now? Who?
You're not allowed to say Mordecai.
I don't know. But what I will tell you, a funny story,
Okay.
and it involves my mother. And for those who have read Apostate, Stories of Deconversion, there's a story in there, a reference I make to a tragic incident involving my mother, that she survived, but it was a terrible incident. And the first time I saw her after that incident, because my mum, we're talking late 70s, so my mum always had long, straight hair past the shoulders, typical 70s lady in Africa. And after that incident, the next time I saw her, her hair was cut short. She put it on a perm. My parents' marriage had broken apart at that point. I was about 9-ish years old. And she was driving a little red Fiat. And I can't remember how long after it was, but at some point within 2 years of this event, she revealed that the name that she'd given this red Fiat was Jezebel. And I knew enough about the Bible at that young age to know that Jezebel was not a name that you attached anything nice to.
Right.
And so I kind of questioned it, and I can't remember what my mother's answer was. So this little red Fiat, for the years that my mum had it, was always called Jezebel. And I still don't. My mum has now since died, so I'll never know the full answer. I'll never be able to ask her. But I'm still very intrigued, because she never lost her faith. I'm still very intrigued why a woman who would go through such a deeply, intimately tragic incident would call their car that name. There's a complexity in there about my mother that I don't understand. So maybe for that reason, I'll say Jezebel.
that's what you will go with. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But
well,
because I love my mother, it's not an
right.
intellectual decision. It's because I love my mother and I miss her.
I understand. For sure. Well, you're getting all teary-eyed again. You need another hug from me, man.
I do. I need another cider. That's what I need. Or looking at the time, it's probably actually hot chocolate time, given my age and my frailty. But what I will try and do, and somebody emailed about me this, please, in 2 months' time. What I will try and do is I will come up with a genuine answer to that question, Alan. And at some point, I'll announce it. But I do need to think about it a little bit more. Damn you, Alan.
I get it, man. I mean, I feel. Look, I mean, it's probably a lot easier when you're a Christian, but then you become an atheist and like, favorite Bible character. What?
Yeah. What I will say is my favorite answer to that question came from an atheist. And that answer was all those unnamed people that Job lost. All those people, his family members, his children, his servants, his friends, who were savagely murdered and never even got a name. And I think that is the favourite answer so far that I've had to that question.
That is a good answer. I want to change my answer. I'll come up with something better.
You took it too seriously. That's your problem.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You know who I am? I'm one of the people that were resurrected in Matthew 27, whatever.
Oh yeah. The Walking Dead. Yes.
That's me. Here's my answer. I'm one of those guys.
Oh, I should have thought of that one. Oh, that's also a great answer. Yes. Listeners, if you're feeling up to it, reasonpress@gmail.com. Send me your favorite Bible character. Let's see if we can have a couple of really good ones coming along, and maybe I'll do a little short episode featuring some of those. Send them in, please. Alan, genuinely, I've really had a fun time having this conversation. Your book is great. Your book is a challenge. Listeners, show notes, books there. I'm sure you've made it this far. If you haven't, I'm sorry, I don't miss you. But anyway, read the book. Alan, when your next book comes out, please be in touch. We'll have you on again, and we'll talk about that again. You've been really good fun. Thank you so much.
I truly appreciate it, Matthew. I've really enjoyed it. Anybody who has read the book or reads the book, please send me your thoughts on email, because I would absolutely love to improve upon it, just so we talk. So I hope you and I stay in touch, though, Matthew, not just wait to the next book, because I really enjoyed this as well. You're a great guy, dude.
Brilliant. Thanks. And listeners, until next time, be happy. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.